Welcome to the Bogosity podcast for the 14th of January 2013, the podcast that's still writing 2012 on checks. This is your host, Shane Killian. First, a brief correction. In the last podcast, I said that the Sandy Hook school shootings were committed with 2 handguns. While the gunman did have 2 handguns, he also had a Bushmaster XM15. The weapon in the trunk was a shotgun. We regret the error. Now let's dehydrate the news of the bogus. It seems like the days of the news media comforting the afflicted and afflicting the comfortable are long past. So much so that a newspaper, the Journal News, decided to publish the names and addresses of New York gun owners. When gun owners complained, they said they were doing nothing more than publishing publicly available information. So, in retaliation, gun owners published the names and addresses of the newspaper's personnel. Now, if the reporters of the Journal News had the integrity of pretty much any movie villain, they would clap ironically and say, "Well played, gun owners. Well played." But what do you think they did instead? That's right, they whined and complained that the gun owners violated their privacy, even though that information is just as public as that of the gun owners, and that publishing their names and addresses constitutes a danger to their families and children. Funny how they didn't seem to show the same concerns for the gun owners they outed, and if they'd had the smarts of a TV villain, they'd at least learn their lesson and stop what they're doing. But no. Now, they're publishing the names and addresses of even more gun owners, complete with interactive map. The gun owners aren't backing down. Already they're contacting the newspaper's advertisers and threatening a boycott, as well as a boycott of vendors who sell the newspaper or provide space for vending machines. What the Journal News is doing is unconscionable, and the fact that they can't handle just retaliation is pathetic. No one is above the law, but the age-old question of who watches the watchers has left the question open as to how the police can be held to the law as well. Florida Highway Patrol Trooper Donna Jane Watts thought she knew. She thought that, as a state trooper, it was her job to pull over all speeders, including cops exceeding the speed limit without running their sirens. Boy, was she wrong. She's suing more than 100 police officers and agencies, as well as the Florida DMV, saying that law enforcement officers from 25 different jurisdictions illegally accessed her personal information, after which she started receiving threatening calls and stalkers on her cul-de-sac. Why? Because she pulled over one cop, Miami police officer Fausto Lopez, for exceeding 120 miles per hour and darting in and out of lanes, something he regularly did on his drive home. According to the dashboard cam, Watts said to him, quote, "This is not a first-time occurrence with y'all. Y'all come from that way all the time, this Miami police car, and we never catch it." Lopez was fired for his wrongdoing, but that didn't stop police from all over the state trying to harass her and threaten her in retaliation. It's gotten so bad that she started opening her mailbox from the side and is in the process of moving. According to her attorney, Murda Desir, quote, "This is an invasion of privacy. Law enforcement does have access to information most residents don't, and with that level of access, there should come a certain amount of care. This is something that's not supposed to be done. It's high time the cops were held to the law like the rest of us, and held accountable for their actions. Best of luck to Watts in finding justice." This podcast has covered before a couple of cases where a male donating his sperm is oppressed in some way. I suppose it was inevitable, but now it seems the ultimate injustice has taken place. The state of Kansas is trying to make a sperm donor pay child support. William Marotta thought he was doing the right thing when he donated sperm to a lesbian couple who wanted to have a child. Jennifer Schreiner was then impregnated with the sperm and gave birth to the child that she raised with Angela Bauer. But then, the couple filed for state assistance after Bauer fell ill and couldn't work. The state insisted that they reveal the name of the sperm donor, threatening to deny their daughter health care if they didn't. When they reluctantly did so, the state filed a child support claim against him. Understand, the girl's 2 mothers did nothing to bring this on. They are completely blameless. In fact, they support Marotta and have pledged their support in whatever action he wants to take against the state. When he donated the sperm, he signed a contract with them, which both relinquished all of his parental rights and absolved him of all child support and other claims that could ordinarily be taken against the father. The two women adopted the girl, although they had to do so separately because Kansas doesn't recognize same-sex unions. According to Bauer, quote, "This was a wonderful opportunity with a guy with an admirable, giving character who wanted nothing more than to help us have a child. I feel like the state of Kansas has made a mess out of the situation." But it seems that in a backward state ruled by outdated Bronze Age mythology, no good deed goes unpunished. Bauer went on to state, quote, "More and more gays and lesbians are adopting and reproducing, and this, to me, is a step backward. I think a lot of progressive movement is happening currently in the world as far as gays and lesbians go. Maybe this is Kansas's stand against some of that. But they aren't actually punishing the gay couple, they're punishing the sperm donor. And this isn't even the first time. Sperm donors in Massachusetts and Vermont were required to pay child support because they maintained a relationship with the children. In New York, a doctor who donated sperm to a young couple was required to pay child support 18 years later. This is completely unconscionable, especially in the case where the donor has no ties to the family and no relationship with the child, and a contractual agreement absolved him of all parental responsibilities. The state of Kansas is arbitrarily ignoring the terms of a contract, something that Article 1, Section 10 of the U.S. Constitution expressly prohibits them from doing. This also exposes another problem with not recognizing same-sex unions. The state cannot collect child support from a same-sex parent, which apparently means they have to go against an innocent sperm donor instead. This is backwards and a horrible injustice. At least there are two states that see sense. Washington State Court of Appeals ruled that a donor cannot be made to pay child support unless he has an explicit agreement with the mother to do so. And a Texas appeals court ruled in favor of a politician who had donated sperm and had been made to pay thousands of dollars in child support. How low down and backwards do you have to be when Texas is more enlightened than you are? Once again, the Obama administration has successfully perverted justice in their murder of 3 American citizens without trial. The ACLU had attempted to gain via the Freedom of Information Act the information showing the reason for the execution of Anwar al-Awlaki, his 16-year-old son Abdul Rahman, and Samir Khan. The absolutely disgusting, murderous, and tyrannical Obama administration argued in court that they should get to ignore one of the best tools for constitutional justice that we have in this country because the communications surrounding the act were privileged. And incredibly, a New York judge agreed. According to ACLU Deputy Legal Director Jamil Jaffer, quote, "This ruling denies the public access to crucial information about the government's extrajudicial killing of U.S. citizens and also effectively greenlights its practice of making selective and self-serving disclosures. As the judge acknowledges, the targeted killing program raises profound questions about the appropriate limits on government power in our constitutional democracy. The public has a right to know more about the circumstances in which the government believes it can lawfully kill people, including U.S. citizens, who are far from any battlefield and have never been charged with a crime." Is a secret kill list the sort of thing that's supposed to happen in the United States of America? According to White House National Security Advisor John O'Brien, there are perhaps dozens of names on Obama's secret kill list, and Obama has specifically approved each one. Here's hoping that someday we'll get the truth about what's going on, before more American citizens die without their day in court. And now it's time to dust off and examine the fossil that is this week's biggest Bogon emitter. And once again, it goes to Paul Krugman, whose theories of economics don't even rise to the level of knowledge has existed in the 19th century. In a recent post on his blog entitled Barbarous Relics, he shows that he is so hideously ignorant about the critical economics concept of money that he should probably have his economics PhD and his Nobel Prize revoked for complete idiocy. Quote, "For many people on the right, value is something handed down from on high. It should be measured in terms of eternal standards, mainly gold. And given that the laws of value are basically divine, not human, any human meddling in the process is not just foolish, but immoral. Printing money that isn't tied to gold is a kind of theft. not to mention blasphemy. First of all, it's a sign of total desperation to try and make your opposition out to be a caricature solely to make them look like religious nuts when they aren't. Second, this is such a big straw man, it's absolutely impossible for this to be an innocent mistake on Krugman's part. First of all, absolutely no one can claim to know anything about Austrian economic principles unless they are familiar with the subjective theory of value. This theory states, very simply, that what is less valuable to one person is more valuable to another. A wheelchair is more valuable to someone who cannot walk than someone who can, for example. This value is expressed by the opportunity costs. In other words, what the person is willing to give up or forego in order to obtain it. Is the law of gravity supposed to be the product of some divine entity just because human beings cannot countermand it? No? Then why is it any less so with the concepts of supply and demand, marginal utility, and opportunity costs? Krugman seems to think that human nature is somehow subject to the whims of the central planners and those in political power, whereas what Austrian economics says is that human action is the driving force of the economy and cannot be changed, only oppressed with tyranny. But listen to Krugman try and turn it around. Quote, "For people like me, on the other hand, the economy is a social system created by and for people." Yes, apparently the only way Krugman can think of for the economy, or anything else, to be a social system is to be managed by force from the top down, and the only way people can say otherwise is if they believe in some kind of deity. Just like the creationists, Krugman is apparently completely unable to conceive of the third possibility, the possibility that reality displays, a bottom-up, decentralized system of spontaneous order. And yet he accuses us of thinking in religious terms. Give me a break. He continues, quote, "Money is a social contrivance and convenience that makes this social system work better, and should be adjusted, both in quantity and in characteristics, whenever there is compelling evidence that this would lead to better outcomes." But who decides what outcomes are better? If the subjective theory of value is true, as it most certainly is, then all this does is impose one person or group's subjective value over everyone else's. But just because value is subjective does not mean that it can be changed at the whim of a bureaucrat. A central planner can claim all he wants that wheelchairs are worthless to legless people. The legless people themselves are still going to disagree. Here's what a lot of people, Krugman included, don't get about the subjective theory of value. It only refers to the change of values based on the person's needs. It does not mean that there is no objectivity behind it. To illustrate this, let's look at a situation where there are no minds involved, bees and flowers. Bees don't really care about flowers or about their reproduction. They just want to make honey. So a flower produces nectar to entice the bee to come and take it, taking some of its pollen in the process and spreading it around, and also receiving pollen from other flowers. Likewise, a flower has no use at all for nectar other than its use in attracting bees. This has all the makings of an economic transaction. The bee provides its courier service for the flower's pollen and takes nectar as a payment. Like an economic transaction, both sides gain. The bee gets nectar it can use to make honey, and the flower gets its pollen spread around. The nectar is more valuable to the bee than the flower, and the pollen is more valuable to the flower than the bee. But there are no minds involved, and despite the fact that the subjective theory of value is very much at play, this is absolutely an objective improvement for both sides. If it weren't, this system would never have evolved in the first place. The only reason such an arrangement exists is that it provides a real, objective, and tangible benefit to the survivability of both bees and flowers. Just as a wheelchair provides a real and tangible benefit to a paraplegic. So when it comes to money, gold is preferred not because of any religious veneration, but because its objective qualities make it very useful as money. It's held its value for thousands of years. Its supply cannot be easily manipulated. It's malleable without being too soft, useful without being too useful, rare without being too rare. It can't be created or destroyed, except in a science lab via easily reversible processes. It's fungible, easy to divide or combine, easy to test for purity, and incredibly difficult to counterfeit. For every purpose of money, a store of value, a means of exchange, fungible and quantifiable, and so on, gold works better than any other substance that has been found, and no Austrian economist has ever written about gold in mystical or religious ways. They all refer to these objective reasons why gold makes good money. So when Krugman says money should be adjusted, he means that a central authority should have the means of creating and destroying money as it sees fit, not as market forces do, the way it works in a gold standard. Quote, "Now the money morality types try to have it both ways. They want us to believe that monetary blasphemy will produce disastrous results in practical terms too. But events have proved them wrong." Really? What events? The Great Depression? The Weimar Republic? Argentina and Brazil in the 1990s? Or what about the current crisis, now in its 5th year after the U.S. government and the Federal Reserve doing exactly what Krugman said they should do to fix it? The economy languishes, with no significant improvements in sight. Yet when the money supply isn't manipulated to fix the economy improves in just a year or two, as it did in 1920-21, 45-46, and in 81-82 after Paul Volcker stopped monkeying with the money supply and let interest rates rise. No, the events over and over again vindicate Austrian theory, not Krugman's insanity. Quote, "The money morality people are basically adopting a pre-Enlightenment attitude toward money and fiscal policy. And why not? After all, they hate the Enlightenment on all fronts." What Enlightenment is he talking about? Surely not the same Enlightenment that produced Adam Smith, Frederick Bastiat, Karl Menger, Ludwig von Mises, and many others. Not the same Enlightenment that inspired the Founding Fathers to make gold and silver coin the only form of legal tender valid in the Constitution. Or does Krugman think the government inflating the money supply is somehow a product of the Enlightenment? Then I guess the Enlightenment extends back to the Ming Dynasty, where paper money was invented pretty much for the purpose of doing exactly what Krugman says they should do. Or even going back to the Roman Empire, where the denarius was debauched until there was hardly any silver content left. No, central authorities monkeying around with the money supply and creating money out of thin air has a history going back thousands of years, none of it with good results. Money printing has been repeatedly and objectively shown to harm the poor, the middle class, and small businesses, and help the rich get richer. Ever since the Nixon shock, wages have not kept up with productivity as they did during the Great Prosperity. And the ideas advocated here by Krugman are by far the biggest reason why. Krugman finishes off with a smug and arrogant platitude. "The bottom line is that we aren't really having a rational argument here, nor can we. Rationality has a well-known liberal bias." Hey, Krugman, we're not the reason we can't have a rational argument. It's because of people on your side who use ridicule and strawman arguments to avoid dealing with the specifics of a theory, as well as directly lying about what the experience of history shows. And all of that means that there's no way anyone other than Paul Krugman could possibly be this week's biggest Bogon emitter. History is written by the winners, and so apparently is economics. That's why there's Liberty Classroom. Probably the best single learning resource for history and economics on the web, Liberty Classroom teaches U.S. history, Western Civ, and economics from actual university professors. There's lots of free material to get you started, including introductory lectures on all these subjects. And when you sign up, you'll get the full site's content for just $99 a year. You can watch or listen to the lectures whenever and wherever you want, even in your car. Learn at your own pace about the subjects you're interested in and become a more effective debater. You'll also get access to the professors via the discussion forum and even live video chats, all for the price of 2 cups of coffee a month. Use our special URL, libertyclassroom.bogosity.tv, and when you sign up, you'll be helping this podcast too. So bookmark libertyclassroom.bogosity.tv and use it when you sign up. Inform yourself against the myths and propaganda of our society. Visit libertyclassroom.bogosity.tv. And now it's time to inspect the padded cell of this week's Idiot Extraordinaire! In the last podcast, we heavily criticized Piers Morgan for his hateful treatment of people who disagree with him on the subject of gun control. But now he's cranked it up to 11. Under the guise of having a proper discussion about gun control, whom do you think he got to appear to argue the pro-gun side? He could have gotten someone from Gun Owners of America or another similar organization. He could have gotten any professional criminologist to examine the statistics. He could have gotten former New Mexico Governor Gary Johnson, who ran for president as a libertarian last year on a pro-Second Amendment platform. No, he got, get this, Alex Jones. Get ready for double the fail.
Hitler took the guns. Stalin took the guns. Mao took the guns. Fidel Castro took the guns. Hugo Chavez took the guns. And I'm here to tell you, 1776 will commence again if you try to take our firearms. Doesn't matter how many lemmings you get out there on the street begging for them to have their guns taken. We will not relinquish them. Do you understand? That's why you're going to fail, and the establishment knows no matter how much propaganda, the Republic will rise again when you attempt to take our guns.
You finished?
Yes, I am finished. You will not take my right. You go through background checks to get guns. How about Prozac? You know the number one. Oh, that's the big sponsor, isn't it? Or that whole class of drugs.
Let me ask you a question.
Oh, got to cut that off, don't you? Don't want to talk about the U.S. number one cause of death is suicide now because they give people suicide mass murder pills.
The tactic is clear. Get a complete nut job on your show to disagree with you so you can paint everyone on the other side as just as nutty as he is. But Morgan started having a problem.
The answer is, hey, wait a minute, I have FBI crime statistics that come out a year late, 2011. 20+% crime drop in the last 9 years. Real violent crime because more guns means less crime. Britain took the guns 15, 16 years ago, tripling of your overall violent crime. True, we have a higher gun violence level, but overall mugging, stabbings, deaths, those men raped that woman in India to death with an iron rod 4 feet long. You can't ban the iron rods. The guns, the iron rods, Piers, didn't do it.
How many gun murders were there in America last year? Do you know?
There were about 11,458, and about 74% of those were gang-related, gangbangers shooting each other. You get 3,500 to 4,000.
That wasn't the
How
question.
many people died from infections in hospitals? 197,000.
Let me just ask you a second.
That's right.
How many gun murders were there in Britain?
How many
year?
great white sharks?
No, how many
kill people every year, but they're scared to swim?
Right. How many gun murders were there in Britain?
A very low amount. I already went over those statistics.
Many? Do you know?
I already went over those statistics.
Do you know the answer?
No, I don't.
You said hundreds.
It's very low.
You said hundreds.
Yes.
It's actually 35.
Well, the point is you can...
Against 11,000. Do you understand the difference between 11,000
Yeah, England
and
wants
35?
to ban...
Yep, he goes right back to his old standby, the bogus cross-cultural comparison between America and the UK. When, first of all, Jones had already given the more proper before and after comparison we discussed in the last podcast. And second, Jones had already acknowledged that the U.S. had more gun murders. Does Morgan have absolutely nothing else with which to support his side? Seems like Morgan knew he was losing, so he brought out this.
Who do you believe was behind 9/11?
Oh, I absolutely know. I have the police on CNN saying, get back, they're going to blow up 7. I have BBC reporting.
Who do you believe is behind
I have the proof.
Wait, what does 9/11 have to do with gun control? Or did you just not have any real answer for his statistics and his arguments that you have to go back to making him look like the nutcase he is in order to win the debate? Well, if you make Alex Jones look like a nut, which isn't hard, you can be said to have beaten Alex Jones. But you can't be said to have made any headway at all in your gun control debate. This is just like going to the beach, trying to kick some sand into the face of the 98-pound weakling, missing, and then tripping and falling on your butt. Piers Morgan taking on such an easy target and still failing as badly as he did means that he and only he could possibly be this week's
Idiot Extraordinaire.
Well, that wraps up this You're Soaking in It edition of the Bogosity podcast. Please visit the forums at Bogosity.tv, where you can read the show notes and join the discussion on these and other subjects. This podcast is free, but not free to produce, so please use the donate button at the top of the Bogosity.tv website or down the right-hand side of the podcast page and give generously to keep this podcast going. And if you'd like to contribute to the podcast, just send a question, statement, news article, or rant to podcast@Bogosity.tv. Put it in an audio file, and if it's good enough, it'll get played right in the podcast. Thank you for listening. Until next time, here's a quote from Harry Browne. People should never be prosecuted for what they own, for what they think, for what they eat, drink, or smoke, or for what they believe. They should be prosecuted only for the physical harm they do to others. And people who do harm others should be prosecuted, whether or not a gun is involved, and whether or not there is hate in one's heart or liquor on one's breath. The Bogosity podcast is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 3.0 Imported License.
Bogosity.
Do you want answers to creationist claims against evolution? Would you like to know more about evolution yourself, or even engage creationists more directly, with actual peer-reviewed sources to back you up? My book, How Evolution is Scientific, is designed to show the basics of evolutionary theory and how it is so well supported using the scientific method. It's impeccably sourced, with references to the actual scientific material, and is arranged using the creationists' own criteria of what is scientific. Using their own arguments against them, see how evolution is scientific, but creationism is not, based on observations, accurate predictions, logic, and evidence. Get answers to common creationist claims, and even a primer on abiogenesis, the start of all life. It's all in my book, How Evolution is Scientific, available at Amazon and on Kindle, EPUB, and PDF as well. Get How Evolution is Scientific and never be taken in by creationists again.